All right. So we are here with the most exciting news ever. We decided to make a response to the Aubrey, Vylana, and Alana conversation.
The most exciting news ever?
The most exciting news ever. That's what it feels like. There's been so much excitement. There's been so much conversation.
I wouldn't call it excitement.
People are so excited. They're just so excited they have to tell him how excited they are about their choices.
I think how excited, with anger you mean, with outrage, with being personally offended by the choices that he's made in his life, and how now they have to change all their views on their own life.
And so that's why we decided to do this, because we want to one-up everyone. We want to make everybody else feel like shit and feel ashamed, and we're going to tell everybody how to live their life. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to do this. Are we doing
a comedy podcast?
No.
No.
But it is comedy in a way to watch the way that this reaction has played out.
And yeah, the funny thing is we were like, I didn't say a word about it because it's just another day in the new age machine. And like people like Aubrey did not decide he was gonna be like headmaster of the new age school. He never decided this.
But other people did, I think, and then they feel disappointed when they're seeing that his and their choices don't align with the way that they are, and then that creates all this judgment. So I think we've gone back and forth so much around this that we decided to sit down and make a lengthy response about it to help people understand how we view ideas, how we can view choices and discern them authentically while not placing entitlement towards other people's lives and judging them and condemning them for these choices.
And I think what we are doing with this video, unlike the many numerous podcast responses that we have seen, where people talk all about them, what they are doing, blah, 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 what you should now be doing because they did this thing. What we're going to try to do is to basically look at the fallout of what this whole thing has created in, let's call it the New Age community, and what we have noticed from that. Just our observations on, this is not even a podcast response. This isn't a response on the emotional outrage that happened after they published their podcast.
And at the same time, there are definitely legitimate questions and discernment that people are entitled to feel. So we wanted to take some more specifics from the conversation that Aubrey and Vylana and Alana had and kind of go into those ideas. Again, this isn't going to be some psychoanalysis on the minds of them, but it's going to be understanding the ideas, the concepts, and how we have experienced similar things in our life and how we've moved through them to view them how we do now.
And like when Ryan said, I need somebody that I can talk about stuff with in a non-judgmental way. I said, yeah, you should find someone to do that. He said, yeah, you. And I said, well, that's not what I want to do, was my first response for a while. And it's still not what I want to do. However, what I do want to do is when there is an opportunity to look at things through a Gnostic lens, to bring people back to what would Jesus do, how would Jesus do it, not in a Christian fake religion way, the actual Yeshua figure that existed in the first century. How would he actually have responded to what's going on? And many of the people that have the love and light in their bio, that are like, oh yeah, we're into all the stuff, we're watching these podcasts, and then they're very outraged with what's happening, claiming that they are also talking to the Ascended Masters, this and that, and then leaving angry comments. We're going to look at how Jesus, if he would have lived now in this time, what kind of comment would he have left on Aubrey's post on his podcast? Maybe I'm gonna dive into just two paragraphs from the Gnostic Gospels. Now, what are the Gnostic Gospels? They come from texts, scriptures that were discovered in the 1940s in Egypt. And these are texts that do not belong to the traditional Christian scriptures that are recognized by the Vatican. These are scriptures that come from hidden texts that empower people, that talk about more metaphysical things. And for those that know me, you'll know that I talk a lot about the Essenes, about the Aramaic and Hebrew languages, about these Essene teachings. So, the Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So my conclusion is, when we look at that, what does that mean? That people projecting onto Aubrey are sometimes, I feel, failing to bring forth what is within and externalizing discomfort instead of owning their inner fragmentation. So the discomfort that you're feeling is a spiritual initiation. All emotions that are coming up for you to get to know yourself better. If you then go and externalize this feeling that is coming up for you to deal with. So this discomfort is sacred. It is yours to transmute, not somebody else's, like Aubrey's to carry. He's transmuting all the discomfort that's coming up for him in his life that may have some kind of an effect on what's going on in your life, what is being triggered inside of you, that you are then being invited by God to look at and alchemize for yourself. So, the next one is from the Gospel of Philip. Great is the mystery of marriage, for without it the world would not exist. And when the two become one, you will say to the mountain, move, and it will move. Meaning basically that relationships, unions, spiritual unions coming together in marriage, in relationship, is a spiritual initiation. Always. Any type of relationship, also friends, children, any type of connection to another person is a spiritual interaction, initiation that is going to trigger things inside of you, invite you again to go within and look at what is being triggered. So whether that's a monogamous or polyamorous relationship, the true question is, are the relationships awakening consciousness or feeding ego structures? And are we being honest about our own projections of purity, betrayal, or power? Or are we demonizing what we don't understand because it disturbs our comfort zone? So where are we externalizing something that we have not brought forth from within ourselves to look at and alchemize on an individual level? And that is where we get the triggers. The triggers itself is not negative. Feeling triggered is not negative. It is then how we deal with these triggers, externalize them or internally process them, or externalize them in a healthy dialogue. That is what is going to determine whether something is appropriate, not appropriate, when it's working through things, when it becomes pointing arrows at somebody else. I think that's good. You can take over.
That's perfect, because my point is that the basis of service to others is the honoring of free will entirely. And that's this whole dilemma, I think, that is at the crux of this situation, is people trying to deem what is actually service to others and what is not, and what is in integrity with service to others and what is not. And people having all these different ideas about what that looks like, and then, like you're saying, externalizing that onto the outside world. So we have all these people running around in the New Age community claiming to be spiritual, claiming to have a relationship with Jesus and the Ascended Masters, and they still have not yet grasped that they have entered a free will experience by their own choice. And by choosing to do that, they have agreed to honor free will. And until that honoring of free will in the entire experience is reached, that consciousness is not going to be able to ascend upwards. Because, again, this isn't like if you judge, then you're punished and you're held where you're at. If you're judging, you're choosing to implement a dense vibration in your heart. And so you're holding yourself in the ground. You're holding yourself in a gravitational way towards separation and judgment that is going to keep you remaining in these patterns and loops. And so the only way to move forward with that is the honoring of your free will, first and foremost, so where you can get to a place of not judging yourself, and then that acceptance can be externalized onto others. And again, we're not saying that there shouldn't be triggers, that there shouldn't be emotion, there shouldn't be things that catalyze in you from listening to people say things, but it's about how you recognize those catalysts and those triggers and turn them within to understand how you're discerning, if you're discerning based off of your acceptance of free will, or if you're still trying to discern from a place of judgment and making things right and wrong in this kind of boxed in paradigm that's supposed to fit for every single person the same way.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people also don't fully understand and really feel, not with your mind, but really in your heart, understand what it means to not judge. Because you could look at us and say, oh, but you're judging, you're doing a whole video. Or if someone writes something in your comments, you're judging because you're answering them. But then I really want to kind of explain the difference between having awareness about something and being direct with another person in a way where you can still hold compassion is not necessarily the same as judging and saying mean things. Those are two different things. And because people have learned to be nice, you have to be nice. And being nice means only saying nice things. When you have a child, and your child is making a mess, but like a total mess, they are starting to throw food around in the kitchen. I'm just saying something. You're not going to be super nice, like, oh, please don't do that because you're making the kitchen dirty. No. In that moment, you are going to say, no, this is not okay. That would be, yes, you are judging, but you're not saying you are evil, you are bad, you are an evil child for doing this. You are just unworthy of my love because you are throwing. No, you're going to say, oh, what you are doing is not okay. I still have compassion, I still have love for you, but this behavior cannot continue. So that's the difference. And basically speaking from awareness, as the parent that sees the child is doing this, is not the same as judging them as a person, as a whole bad person. So judgment, back to my notes, is basically saying you are bad, you are unworthy. About Aubrey, for instance, cast them out, cancel them, they are unworthy, you are just a whole evil person. And discernment is saying there are behaviors here that we are observing, that we are witnessing, and let's have a conversation about it. Let's bring light to it without hate, and basically observing and choosing accordingly then without being emotionally attached to the choices of another. So that is basically the difference between shining a light on something and swinging a sword, basically.
Yeah. And people are so entangled with the concept of judgment as observation, and we think of our justice system, and it has to go through a judge in order for these people to get their sentence. And so the judge is what is keeping us safe as a society in our minds. So there's this concept of judgment and justice, and that judgment comes through morality. So for me, like you're saying, judgment is the morality structure. It's the saying that you are worse or less worthy of love than me because of the choices that you're making. And it's creating a pedestal. It's either inferiority or superiority. So that judgment can then come through as demanding that someone like Aubrey needs to recognize his behaviors and make choices in a different way. And so someone could be like, oh, well, I'm just discerning the behavior. But then it becomes, well, then why are you going to the place of demanding that they need to make choices differently, rather than I can recognize this and I can make choices accordingly based off of my intuition and what's in integrity with my heart? Because people look at this situation and they get so flared up that they cannot see the integrity that already exists within it, and the integrity that is actually already making the choices, meaning Aubrey, Vylana, and Alana, in this situation. And because they look at themselves to think that they'd be out of integrity if they're making that same choice, they then look at these people and think they're venturing off path, they're wrong, they're confused, they need to change these things about their life. But when it comes down to it, it's also like, did they ask you for that advice? Like, all of a sudden, there's these people who have been getting this experience and this information and these ideas and this wisdom from these people, and these people then vulnerably express their choice, and then the people turn and they become this analysis expert on the way that they think that they're making choices, not recognizing that they're just completely projecting from their own trauma patterns that are within them.
And also, again, the emotional attachment that you develop when you are interacting with these people's content, and that is then going to basically be where you get tricked into feeling personally offended by their life choices. You can observe the situation and you can then see, oh yeah, they are doing all these things and I'm not agreeing with this. That does not mean that the choices that you're making in your life are less valid, are not the right ones. You can feel confused about what you have heard, what you have seen, that they have said. But it's all coming from some kind of emotional attachment on a subconscious level that you have given over to these people, and they have never asked, give me all your sovereignty. Let me decide how you are going to live your life. About some of the morals and values of some of the people involved in the podcast. We can get into it, but then again, is it our job to do that? Because where is the line with us objectively analyzing this podcast, and where does it become judgment? That's another thing. I think if you can say for yourself, I'm seeing this situation, I can see behaviors that are not morally acceptable, and say, I don't agree with this behavior, okay, and I agree with this behavior, okay, that is discernment, that is not judgment. But if you start saying, this one figure in this whole conversation has questionable morals, therefore all of them are just rotten to the core, then you are judging. And there have been like something escalated, I suppose, at their property, and then I'm starting to wonder if people are okay. If people are emotionally okay, if you have gotten to the point where you feel the need to physically go to somebody's house to do something about something that you find offensive.
Mm-hmm. And the questioning of integrity is really important. That's how I've gotten to the place where I am of psychic awareness, of being able to make videos about people's polarization, because I understand the multi-dimensional levels of the soul and how people can present themselves in a certain way and have completely opposite intentions underneath and do completely opposite things in the shadows. So it's really important for us to question these things. It's important for us to ask, is this lining up? Is there integrity within this being? Do they know that they have this integrity, or that they're missing, that they're avoiding this integrity? And so this is where that line comes in about not making yourself better or worse than the person that you're observing. Because I make videos about the polarization and the choices that people are making, and a lot of these people in the videos I make are not lining up. They're the ones that a lot of people would deem are evil or immoral and are wrong, and that there has to be justice that needs to be had. But from the place that I've gotten to, I'm recognizing that the only true way for positive evolution to happen is to have a complete and utter detachment from that recognition and observation of what's going on, well understanding if those choices from that person are being made from their heart and how that's playing out in their life through these karmic patterns. Because there's a difference between someone who is intentionally making choices to harm others, or to we think of pedophilia, for instance. If someone is they capitalize on their impulses. They are very intentional about the way that they work on that.
They're acting on these things on purpose, and they're predators.
Versus someone who is people who are making choices in their life, and that kind of may overlap into the spectrum that we see of these people that are being labeled as evil. So people's inability to discern the true negativity then creates their need to project these moral hierarchies onto people and create guilty by association tactics through their individual choices and through the people that are in their circle or that they hang out with.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I also was going to say earlier is, because people have a hard time distinguishing judgment from discernment, because they are emotionally connected to these people that they have put on a pedestal. And for me, because we're not saying, oh yeah, we are not admiring anyone, we are not whatever. Like for me, a person that I really admire is Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon. And I can definitely say if something weird was going to come out about him, I would feel hurt. I would definitely then have to go within and look at that stuff that is living inside of me, and why is it that this is triggering me? But I would then not go on his page and be like, blah, 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 you did this, you whatever. I would have to look at the stuff that's coming up inside of me, and I hope to God nothing no weird stuff is going to come out of it.
No, he's good.
But
he's a cool guy.
And anyway, where I was going with this is hate and love are very close together. And they are both basically showing that you have an emotional attachment to a person. So whether you're going to react in full support or in full hatred, it is because you are emotionally connected to what these people are doing in their lives. And if you can admire what somebody's doing without being emotionally attached, without giving away your decisions, your own morals and values for your life, and just observing they're living their life. They are doing the things that they should be doing. I can admire that for them. Then you're not going to feel this intense love or hate reaction. You're going to be able to take a step back and just observe. And you can then see without judging, but through discernment, what it is that you agree with, what it is that you understand. And even if you don't understand their choices because they are just not lining up with the plan that your soul has for you, you can still understand that they have to do what they have to do.
Mm-hmm. And with Aubrey, I have personally gone through this process. He was one of the first people that I found on Instagram that was talking about spirituality, talking about God. Specifically, he was talking about God. And guess what I did? I started putting him on a pedestal. I started making him my idol. I started looking up to him in all these different ways. I started projecting all of my stuff onto him. And I got the opportunity to then join Fit for Service, the community that he has. And so I had somewhat consistent interactions with him over the course of about 2 to 3 years. And so I would go to these physical retreats, these meetups for Fit for Service, and I would have these experiences in between these retreats of large awakening processes, a lot of discernment, and I would go through processes of questioning Aubrey's integrity, of questioning all of the coaches' integrity within those containers. And especially being in that container, you're then getting the opinions of people in that physical space. So there were many opinions around Aubrey that I was getting of him being mean or rude or an asshole sometimes, and all of these different things that were getting me to choose how I was discerning the way that he was. And every single time I showed up at one of these Fit for Service retreats, my desire to try to find something out of integrity with Aubrey was ripped away every single time from the space that he created in these containers. And it's him and a bunch of coaches and a whole team, so a lot of them are doing it. But Aubrey birthed this container, and the integrity of that container and Aubrey is really what allowed me to see an example of someone who is making choices, being devoted to God, and then being vulnerable and expressing transparently those choices to the public, because that was a whole other level that I was seeing. It was like he was the CEO, he had on it, he had all these things going on, and yet he was talking about his sexual traumas. He was talking about all of these different things. And so it was like that vulnerability was almost what created this level of trust in signing up for Fit for Service and using On It products and doing these things, because I could feel that he was just being this example. And well, there were plenty of experiences where I saw him making choices or saying ideas that I was like, oh, hold on, like I don't agree with it in that way. It still has always come back to the space of understanding his integrity and his level of embodiment. And that's why I feel the need to speak on this level of judgment as well, because when we're going into people's karma and the choices that people are making based off what they need to make, the karma that they're attempting to release and forgive, they have to make choices that are aligned with that karma. And that's not going to look like other people's choices. And so while I consistently ran into people and beings that were displaying negative intentions and kind of showing themselves to be out of integrity within this kind of Fit for Service experience, I always was anchored back into the full objective truth that Aubrey was in integrity and still is in integrity through his process of his choosing. So I also started following him when he was in his first polyamorous relationship, and then he left that and he got with Vylana. And so it was this thing where I was used to him talking about polyamory stuff too. So I think when he started doing it again, I was just kind of like, oh, That's what I first saw him talking about. So it's
Mhm.
not that big of a deal to me, I guess.
And the thing is, I don't really know that much about him. And I'm very unusual in that way, I suppose, that I don't really have many, like all these bigger channels, bigger content creators in the spiritual community. I don't follow very many of these people online. I kind of started out with my spiritual awakening in childhood, when the internet was not a big thing, and I was channeling my guides when I was a teenager, and I was going to the library, reading all these books. Then it kind of like went into a little bit of a slumber phase, and I reawakened after my daughter was born. But I was very much kind of on my own, doing my own thing, discover like kind of the way that I was used to doing it on my own. And I have a few people who I will sporadically watch some content from, like the channeled messages that Cryon, that Lee Carroll channels from Cryon, and it is very sporadically. But I have watched like maybe a handful of Aubrey Marcus's like maybe 3-4 podcasts that I've watched over the course of maybe the past 5 years. So I am familiar with the figure of Aubrey Marcus, but I'm not at all that familiar with his life, whatever, who he is. And the few podcasts that I've watched, the reason why I watched it, because one was with Dr. Robert Gilbert, who passed away last year, who was a Rosicrucian, modern Rosicrucian. And I'm intrigued, of course, by anything that is connected to Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism, Christian mysticism, and Hebrew teachings, stuff like that. So that is how I kind of connected with him, through this podcast that I found like, oh, interesting. And I could notice, like, that's why I resonated with that specific podcast, the devotion that he had to these teachings and to diving into actual mysticism and not just the fluffy New Age stuff. So that's kind of the extent of my knowledge on Aubrey Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and like when just being clear, like, every time I went to these Fit for Service retreats, I had to realize where I was putting him on a pedestal, where I was projecting my father wounds onto him, all of these things. And then each time there would be something that I disagreed with him on, or that I felt like, I'd then have to realize, I'm putting this man on a pedestal, and he's just another human living his life. And he's willing to be transparent about the way he's living that life. And I think that's the thing, is the level of devotion that I always felt from him. And he always brings things to God. That's the thing too that we talk about, that a lot of teachers are not bringing things to God still. It's still very much about manifestation and them and this higher self and the ascended master. But it's not just bringing it to God. And you can tell that is his anchor point. That is what it is. And so it's interesting for me to watch people make these response videos about him and compare him to a pedophile luring children with candy, or compare him to a narcissist, and calling him a narcissist.
The thing is, the reason for anybody that doesn't know our background stories, which would be surprising at this point, if you're watching a video number, I don't know, because we're going to chop them in smaller. Like, you're gonna know that we have gone through abuse. We have gone through narcissistic abuse. And it is from that discernment, from being in the place of being subjected to true narcissistic abuse, that we can look at people and also see things are not black and white. People are not purely all evil, purely all good, because there's people also in his comments like, yes, but if this is a negatively polarized person, then how am I learning so much from them? Because all souls are in essence still connected to God. even the negatively polarized ones, that will have contracts that they are not even aware of to help others while they're like filling out their negative agenda. They're actually accidentally still helping people. So the same thing with any person. Like, you're always going to be the villain in anybody's story, and a lot of it is about perspective. What is your perspective in the whole story? Where is your point of view? And from that point of view is where you can choose to have judgment or discernment based on your willingness to take a step back and see the whole perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to like Vylana and Alana, the way that people have been responding and saying things to me has, like I said, comparing it to Aubrey luring children with candy. It's like they're looking at these women as these, like, I don't even know what word, like dumb people who don't realize that they're making choices in their life in the way that they are. Like they're being tricked and lured into something against their will. And that is a perfect example of karmic patterns being triggered in the individual. Because if you watch this podcast they did and you see Vylana crying and expressing emotionally when Aubrey is talking about the message from Isis, that could trigger your other lives where you have felt deceived, where you have been a part of polyamorous relationships, or maybe even haven't been a part of polyamorous relationships. You were just with some other dude and they decided to deceive you, or maybe they didn't really deceive you and you made choices of your own free will and deceived yourself. So now in your Akashic records, you're holding this anger and this rage and this hatred towards this person in this other life. And that is what's being triggered by this situation. And so it's coming down to free will. Again, like, these are adult women. They are aware of themselves. They know what they're doing. They're choosing, and they're choosing through their intuition, and they're choosing through their karmic patterns that are going to align them into their highest reality, because you can tell that they have the intention to align to their highest reality. They're just trying to figure it out. They're just trying to understand what that reality is. And so they're going to go through karmic revealings of humiliation that they have in their body, in jealousy that they have, in shame. And so these emotions in their bodies are going to uproot and be triggered through their processes of making those choices. And that's what a devotion to God is, because you're devoting yourself to the karma. You're devoting yourself to the hard shit, not just to the let's wipe our hands, forget about this, and go live life chasing this perfected carrot that we think we are supposed to do. And so when you're listening to that intuition, you're going to have to make choices that you feel iffy about, and you're just going to have to go with it. And the worst thing that we can do if we are wanting to polarize a service to others is to shame someone for their choices. That's the worst thing that we could do, because that's the process that got us into this whole war and this whole conflict in the first place.
I had something good to say and now it's gone.
Oh, you did.
But basically, that people are indeed in the comments coming to the defense of these women. And often it's coming from some kind of unprocessed wound. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Like Ryan said, yeah, past life trauma. But for many women, because like 1/3 of all women has experienced some form of sexual harassment in this life. I'm not talking about other lives. 1/3 of all girls and women has experienced behavior that could be labeled as sexual intimidation, harassment, even assault and abuse. And I'm one of them. And if you're watching, well, I think it's more than 1/3, honestly. I think it's like half at least. And then you're going to let those moments where you couldn't let that out, it's all going to come out, because this public figure is all of a sudden on this platform, and you get to throw all of your shit onto them. And I keep seeing the image, and I've been seeing this image since this whole thing started, of this medieval, like in the Middle Ages, a person on a stage and them being just completely just tomatoes being thrown at them, rotten food being thrown at them, all this stuff. And so a lot of women have this trauma from this lifetime, where there is a deep rooted default not trusting of the masculine. And then when you put this person on this pedestal subconsciously, because you may not be aware of the fact that that is what you have done with this person, and suddenly they do something that is like, oh my God, what are you doing? That's what you're going to be thinking. And then you have this feeling of outrage. And then you want to immediately come to these two women's defense, because you feel that they are personal. It's you. In that moment, you are feeling like this is happening to you. It's a trauma response. Why am I saying this? Because I was basically not like them in that situation, but I was in a situation where I was being gaslit, manipulated, brainwashed into believing that that is what I should be wanting, that I should be okay with being in a polyamorous relationship, and I was not okay with it. But it did not at all look like the dialogues that they were having. It looked different. And I was young. I was very young. So in a way, yes, you could say, oh, poor you, you were young. But at the same time, all these souls, we have to trust that all the people involved on a soul level know exactly what they are doing. And you do not have to control their reality. If you truly trust God, then yes, you could trust that their souls are orchestrating this whole thing and they know exactly what they're doing. Of course, there are some instances when you do have to say something, like when it involves minors. Obviously, that's a whole different story, but that is not the case with the people that we are talking about right now, which does bring us to maybe the next topic of the doctor that they have.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause it because I have to pee. All right. So, to Mark Gaffney, Dr. Mark Gaffney. We're not going to get into too many details around this, I think, but this is something that people brought up consistently as a part of this situation, so we wanted to address it. With that, Mark Gaffney is the other person in the podcast with them, one of Aubrey's teachers, and people are bringing up how he has been accused of things in his past that point to sexual things with minors. And all you have to do is go on Wikipedia, look up his name, and then go to the section that talks about the controversies. It's all right there. But it's at a short summary. He had a relationship with teenagers when he was older, and he admits to it. This is what I'm reading from Wikipedia. So it's this whole kind of thing where then people are bringing up, well, so you have this doctor here giving this advice on this podcast, and you have Aubrey learning from him, wanting to be he's been his teacher for a while. He's been learning from him for a couple of years now. And so, I mean, understandably so, people are seeing this and then wanting to question the integrity of how that kind of plays out in the group and towards Aubrey. And again, this is necessary to question that, to bring in these moving pieces, but to then understand that it's multidimensional. And what we talked about earlier with guilty by association, when we feel enraged, when we feel like we want to blame someone or point fingers at something, it's very easy for us to create guilty by association tactics and look at one person and say, oh, well, because they're interacting with them or they're in their circle, then they must be doing the same thing. So I'm on to you too. And so that is really just kind of like, it's a piece to the puzzle, because people, I think, are questioning like, well, what does that have to do with it? And I don't want to do a psychic reading on Mark Gaffney in this. It's like if I'll do a psychic reading on him in another video if I need to. But it was just kind of bringing that into the awareness of that this does play into the situation, because people are seeing the spectrum of how polyamory and someone with a platform like Aubrey, who is looked at as candy, as someone who can lure and bait, that's branched into the spectrum of having sexual relationships with teenagers or minors. And so it's like it's entangled together. And so they think, well, if Aubrey's doing this, then he's enabling that other side of the spectrum.
Yes, I think, and it's again people's emotional attachment to the figure of, in this case, Aubrey Marcus, and this ideal that they held of who this figure was, and then suddenly seeing how there is this person close to him, and we can definitely say, and that is not us then judging this person, say, oh, Mark Gaffney is a piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. No, we are simply seeing, I don't know this guy. I have no emotional attachment to this doctor. I don't know who he is. We can simply discern that the behavior is definitely inappropriate, because I have a daughter. She's going to be 11. Let's say this girl that he had allegedly a relationship with was like 14, so that's 3 years older than my daughter.
And he was 35 at the time.
Okay, so obviously...
sorry, that could be wrong. Take that back. She was 14, he was older.
Anyway,
talking.
So definitely... And he said something along the lines of, oh, but she consented. Any person that has a daughter, any of you watching that has a daughter, or that has ever been a 14-year-old girl, you don't know anything. You don't know anything because you have the mental capacity of a child, and you have the physical reactions of a person that is being flooded with hormones. You are being flooded with all kinds of different hormones, and your mental capacity is not that of an adult. You cannot be held responsible for your choices when it comes to sexuality when you are 14. So if an adult is making it seem like you want this, you're going to go with it. That is not synonymous with you consenting, because that girl, when she's 14, when she's 24, is going to say, oh my God, I was sexually assaulted, and I couldn't even grasp that mentally at that time when I was 14, but now that my brain is fully developed, I'm actually seeing it for what it was. Obviously, that behavior is not okay. Mm-hmm. So him saying these things, yes, does not help this whole situation. And now with him being this advisor to Aubrey Marcus, is making it seem like Aubrey, and the thing again is, we don't know how aware he is of these things. I would believe that he is aware of these things since it's just online. Yeah. So that is definitely a little bit questionable. Does that mean that Aubrey Marcus is saying, oh, I am doing all these things too. I agree with all the stuff you've done. I think that's all good. I don't believe that that is necessarily the truth either.
Mm-mm. No, because again, Aubrey honors free will. And so he's also going to give people the benefit of the doubt in the... I don't want to say naivete, but in our spiritual awakening, when we have yet to fully place the level of deception that's going on, we can want to give people the benefit of the doubt and their positivity of change. So if this happened when he was younger, Aubrey then looks at Mark and says, oh, well, he's doing these things now. I'm feeling this way with him. So obviously he's attempting to change. He's in integrity by Aubrey's measurement of integrity. And so he's picking up on that at these kind of different types of levels. And so I think the thing that then compares to is they hear them talk about how Aubrey and Alana met, and then the whole situation with the ISIS message. And so they see Alana as, I can't remember how old, she said she is 28, 29, something like that. And so then they see Vylana and Aubrey, and they're older. They have this platform. They have this reputation. They have this glamour and this candy, this bait. So they're seeing that if Aubrey finds this girl on this app and then reaches out to her and he's vulnerable with her like he is in his life, because he's going to be straightforward with her, because he's going to let her honor her free will, because he's going to lay it out on the table and say, this is what's happening, you can choose this, yes or no. And so they look at that as this woman being only 28, 29 years old, and they then compare it to the situation of someone who's like 14 to 17. You know, that whole thing. So it becomes this question of, is she being hypnotized and pulled into this reality subliminally? And then is that being assisted by this Mark Gaffney character? And is it this whole ploy? And is nothing how I thought it seemed?
And I think when you are, because I was 28 when my daughter was born. So that is 10, almost 11 years ago. I was not at all the person that I am today, definitely. But why? Because I learned a lot in this past 10 years, in this past decade. But I also made choices that would I now make them again? Absolutely not. But was I in a state where I was responsible for my own choices? Absolutely. I was making choices that in the moment, but if my older self would now look at them, she would say, oh, that's not a good choice, what you're doing. But I needed to make these choices because I had karmic entanglements with the people involved, and that was going to look messy, and I had to go through all this stuff. And yeah, people around me were probably judging me for some of the decisions that I was making. But I was going like fully into this whole karmic knot. And it is the thing that these people are also doing with their lives. The only difference between me and them is that they are on this big YouTube channel. They have an audience. I was doing whatever the hell I was doing. I was not in a polyamorous relationship or marriage, but it was definitely messy looking. And the people around me definitely had their ideas about it. But the thing is, I was able to just go through it and learn from it. And I believe that's what everyone on this planet is simply doing with their lives.
So I think we're getting pretty close to being done. I want to talk about my experience with the ISIS consciousness.
Real quick.
Yeah.
We listened to that specific part in the podcast. And he said that ISIS, it was implied, it was not necessarily said, I am ISIS, this is me speaking to you, but she basically came through and it was implied that it was ISIS speaking to Aubrey, saying, you need to have children with both of these women. And when I heard it like that, there's two questions. One, is he paraphrasing? Is he saying it because he's on the podcast and that's how it came out of his mouth? Or were those the literal words that he heard? And I'm, again, not judging, but just speaking from my experience and discerning that in my experience, when a spirit says you need to, you have to, that is not a spirit that is respecting your free will, and it will most definitely not be a true divine ascended master. Then it is probably something else. And again, if it was another type of spirit, maybe it was all part of the grand scheme of him now going in this whole adventure with them, because this is part of their karmic unraveling. Okay.
So let's break down ISIS real quick. So ISIS is basically the Thoth of the feminine ascended master. Isis is a hijacked identity. The original incarnation that the identity was taken from was an organic service to others ascended master. So the being, the identity that was ripped from this organic ascended master was inverted and turned into Isis. So when we are tuning into Isis or learning about Isis, we have these kind of severed identities around it, because same with Thoth. Thoth is a hijacked identity of an incarnation of Ra, of a positive incarnation of Ra. So when you tune into Thoth, you're getting part of the consciousness of this Ra identity that it's taken from, and then you're getting the distorted, inverted consciousness as well. So when we think of someone like Kaya Ra and Isis in the Sophia Code, that is the purest and clearest connection to Isis that I have felt from someone, because Kaya is connecting to Sophia first. And Sophia is that original organic incarnation. So Kaya connecting to Sophia then creates a clearer input for the Isis identity to be talked about. And so then through the receiving of that Isis identity, it's transmuted. And so it's, again, if Kaya wasn't as embodied or grounded and tuned into the discernment that she is at, she could have, at another point in her life, brought through a hijacked version of Isis. But because she was tuned into this discernment, she brought through an organic version of Isis. So I just want to show those two things, because I was not aware of this hijacked process of Isis at the time of this experience that I'm about to talk about. So when I was in my previous relationship in my marriage, it was before we got married. We both got into Aubrey, and it was when he was in his polyamorous relationship. And so her and I tried out polyamory for like 6 months, and it was like a dud. Like nothing happened. I mean, there was a lot of emotion and a lot of trigger, but it wasn't like there wasn't anything exciting that happened. It was just a lot of thought and fear coming up. And so we then closed that off after 6 months, but the conversation of that topic stayed in our relationship. And not so much are we opening the relationship to another person, but like, do we want to have a sexual experience? Do we want to, like, just the concept of a third, kind of. And so while I was in this relationship with this person, I connected with another person, and I was connecting with her through the consciousness of Isis. And I felt that I had this really strong connection with this person. So over the next couple years, it came up about us having a conversation about this third person, this Isis person, being a part of our experience. So that created a lot of turmoil and conflict in our conversations between me and my partner at the time. And so what I'm getting at is that I was having this connection with this consciousness that was Isis, and I was feeling this similar pattern that's happening with Aubrey, this like triple, this thruple type thing kind of showing itself. And I was like following it. I wasn't saying I wanted it to happen. I wasn't saying like I need this to happen, but it would come up in conversation and it would be talked about and it would be observed. So nothing ever happened with that. I was still friends and had this connection with this third person. I then break up with that partner, and right when I'm breaking up with that partner, this consciousness of Isis comes back into my awareness and starts acting as this guide for me through the process of breaking up. So that consciousness is pointing me to this third person that I had this Isis connection with. So I immediately start getting pulled to there being some sort of timeline of this Isis relationship manifesting with me. So I'm following this guidance from this consciousness of Isis, and I start kind of chasing this third person. It becomes this like this chasing dynamic where I'm chasing, and I was following my intuition with the integrity through that process that this is what I'm receiving as my source intuition, and this is where I'm going to. So it was just a chase process. In that same time, I was still chasing. I then met another person. And again, this thruple
idea started showing itself once again, and it was all being orchestrated through this consciousness of Isis. So pretty quickly, I realized the integrity of the situation that I wanted in that new relationship coming in, the person who wasn't Isis. And I immediately said, this is going to be a monogamous relationship. There's not going to be a third thing. But that idea kept coming into my mind. It kept being this like possibility of this thing. So then both of those relationships I drop, and I completely drop this new relationship that was forming. So this connection with the consciousness of Isis fell away completely. I was not following the guidance of Isis any longer. And I was in this new process of integrity of my vibration. And so I was holding this integrity of the relationship that I would call in. And so that then led me to meeting you. So my point is that there were ideas presented to me from a consciousness that was claiming it was Isis, that was showing me the prospect of a polyamorous relationship. And I followed my intuition through that process the whole time, and it led me to you. So then, once we came together, I was able to take a step back and see this whole path that was behind me that I had just been following, and seeing how that consciousness that I was following, that was Isis, was a little bit out of my integrity. And I didn't think that it was out of my integrity at the time, because I was tuned into my intuition. But then when I think about it, was it out of my integrity because I followed those choices and it led me to you?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the paradox.
And then we end up with one of my previous relationships, where I frequently created content talking about the twin flame concept with this other person. We were talking about this whole concept. We were actually effectively helping people with the stuff that we were talking about, to then later discover in my own life, by just going through life, oh, this is not what I thought it was. The twin flame concept has been hijacked, has been inserted, things have been inserted in the true Heros Gamos Sacred Union concept that has created a whole messy knot of multiple concepts being mixed together, like a muddy, like something very weird. So I had to then take a whole step back from this whole twin flame concept after talking very publicly about it, and see, okay, I have been saying all this stuff, and I was in that moment purely following my intuition, listening to God, going through all these steps, learning more about this, going through these things that others may judge me for, and saying, oh, you were saying all this stuff, now you're saying it's no longer true, how can we believe you? Because I'm a person simply going through my experience. I am not an ascended master. I am simply one step ahead of you in this whole game of earth, of this whole game of life. I have seen certain things, and I'm just saying one step ahead of you. I mean, if you are learning from me, you could say, oh yeah, you have learned some things that I'm now learning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're all doing here. That is what we are all doing here. And then all of these things led me to eventually coming to this whole big conclusion with the findings of Ryan. We have put them all together to see how this Heros Gamos thing has been hijacked with artificial cloned souls, with false light new age ideas that have been slightly altered and implanted into the spiritual community. I had to go through all these mistakes before I could reach some of the newer insights that I have gotten to. Does that mean that the people I helped with all the readings that I've done for Twin Flames, that was wrong, that I was lying, that they were not helped, that their lives were not made better? No, because their lives were made better. Because at that point, that was exactly what they needed. So the things that now Aubrey is going through, and he is helping people with his podcasts. He's even helping people that disagree with him by forcing them to now look at the stuff that he's bringing up inside of them. So I guess what I'm trying to say is he's just a person that is going through his life, and I'm seeing how everyone is kind of demonizing him either, or fully coming to his defense, when he's a person just with flaws like everybody else. I'm not a perfect person. Ryan's not a perfect person. Aubrey Marcus is not a perfect person. But there are things about us that we are definitely, that are good, that we can admire. Then there are things where we are like, oh, I need to work on this a little more. And everyone is the same when it comes to that. Everyone has things that they can say, I'm good at this. This is really good of me. And these are things that I'm still working on. And we have to keep in mind that when it comes down to it, everyone is in that position.
And when you're in that position, when you are listening to your intuitive guidance, and it kind of feels confusing because you also have this platform where you're going to share these choices with people, you're going to work to define your ideas and your language definitions to fit the integrity that you know you are choosing from. So this brings up the concept of radical monogamy, and them saying the definition is radical monogamy, because they are choosing in these intuitive spaces and it's in integrity, they're feeling like the feelings they have within the situation, because they're trying to do this from a higher state of mind, isn't fitting that box of polyamory or monogamy. So they're going to work to fit that definition as best as they can. And this is a part that gets tricky, and I understand why people kind of freak out about this, because this is something that full-on narcissistic behavior and service to self minds will do. They'll change the definition of words to what they want, and then they'll play this weird game where they're like, oh, well, that's what that definition is, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? No, that's not what that means. So I understand why this brings things up, but on the other side, language is the core of our ascension. We have to understand our associations and our definitions and corresponding them to the way we're actually truly feeling. So their attempt at this radical monogamy definition is really trying to break down the boxes of conditioned polyamory and conditioned monogamy. And I think we just talk about it different, and we'll say like a soulmate triple relationship, or a sacred union that is through soulmates that are three people in a relationship. But they're seeing something and saying like radical monogamy and using that as the definition, to whereas we might say like, oh, it's a soulmate relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think because we just kind of went through the podcast real quickly. We didn't watch the whole thing. When I hear the word radical, it's like extreme. That's what I think. And when I hear the words radical and monogamy together, and again, this is then me just making my definition of something they said. And I'm going off of these two words, and I think, oh, you're super monogamous. Radical monogamy means you are just super monogamous. And then I'm like confused, like, wait, I'm confused but I believe that you can simply have an experience in life, because this has happened to me. You can have experiences in life that you could never in your life have been prepared for. And you can have ideas, and then 2 years later, they are completely shifted because of experiences that you have had that you could have never been prepared for. And so I'm always interested in looking at different people's points of view because I am a Libra. So I am kind of always looking at, how are you seeing this? How are you seeing this? I can understand how somebody can get triggered from watching this and saying, oh, you are using these words, you are trying to change my reality by saying these things. I understand and have compassion for their anger. And at the same time, I see Aubrey's experience. I see how he's trying to make sense of the things that are happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I see him using words in the attempt to try to make sense of his experience. The unfortunate thing is that he's doing that on camera and that people have a voice and there's a comment section.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Yeah.
And that was really my last point that I had written down, because it's just around what you're finishing off saying is like, they're human. Like, we're all a part of this human soul, and we're on this planet, and the basis of it is allowing people to choose and allowing yourself to choose what resonates with you. And if I could give any type of like psychic insight specifically into what is happening in this situation, it's that they are completely and utterly aligned perfectly with their soul choices, and that their higher selves chose to go through this at this specific time in order to catalyze, obviously, their personal experience first, but to then catalyze that in the collective. And so that's the insight. It's perfect. Everything is good. Everything's okay. And it will continue to be unless you deem that these people's choices are all of a sudden threatening your life and your quality of existence.
Mm-hmm. I think because we already live in such unpredictable circumstances, when you look at politics, when you look at just what's happening in the world in general, when we subconsciously put specific people on a pedestal, especially after you have some sort of spiritual awakening, and you suddenly find somebody that says things that you is like something to hold on to, you grab onto that person, you grab on to what they're saying, and this is like your stability. And I think that's what people do when they find these people that they admire, they like what they have to share. You're gonna hold on to that person and or their channel, whatever, and then suddenly they are going through an experience that you feel is just very chaotic, like for you to suddenly be witnessing that in their life. And then that's going to bring up all this stuff inside of you, that they are these catalysts on a soul level that were meant to have this effect on everybody that's watching this podcast. So that means that you should look at, okay, you should do what you want. Don't do it, whatever. Like for me personally, this immediately brought me back. I'm really quickly going to see because I don't know why this is.
It went dark.
Yeah. And I can't.
I think it might.
Where was I? What was I saying last?
Holding on to people that you've found because you idolized them at the beginning, and holding on to them tightly because they become your sense of like support and outlet for growing.
So then in a world that is already chaotic and you have awakened, making the world even more weird and strange because everything that you thought was one way suddenly is a whole different way. And that's what happens with spiritual awakening. So he as a soul and Vylana and Alana, whatever, all of them, they chose to come initiate you. And I know you're going to be like, what the hell? They're not initiating me. Where are you? Their souls are initiating the next level of self-discovery for you. And so that's what happened with me when I went through this whole experience where my ex-husband had an affair, and those that have watched the podcast know. And while we were married, he actually got somebody else pregnant. This child is it's my daughter's younger sister. And right now we have all a very unconventional connection where we wish each other the best. I wish this little girl the best. I even message on this app. I play a game with them, all three, with my daughter, with her little sister, and we're playing this game on this app all together. Some people are going to be like, what are you doing? That is weird. These were big catalysts for me to open my heart and feel things that I would have never felt, would I have never been triggered by that thing happening to me where this other woman got pregnant. Now, I then decided, hey, this is not for me. I'm not doing this whole big family, multiple children, multiple wives thing. That's just not going to be the thing for me. Which is then, of course, and they're making a different decision. Vylana, Alana, they are saying a whole different thing. And because I have made the other decision, I can say, okay, I know what it's like to be in that position. And it's not up to me to make any decisions for anybody else. And I think that's it.
I think that's it. That felt good.
Mm-hmm. So for those that, if you're going to comment, and by now there will be multiple videos up, just make sure to watch all the different parts, I would say. Maybe also kind of go within first before you leave any comments, so that we can have a constructive dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Anything else?
Well, thanks for tuning in.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Until next time.